The summer of 1997 arrived in Oregon with warm sunlight, thick pine-scented air, and the kind of calm that made everything feel peaceful on the surface. The Harper family lived in a quiet suburban neighborhood where kids rode bikes in the evening and neighbors waved from their porches. Mark Harper worked as a construction manager, steady and responsible, while his wife Linda was a nurse known for her kindness. Their children, Emily and Jake, were inseparable, always laughing, always playing, always arguing in that playful sibling way that felt normal in every American household. To everyone who knew them, the Harpers looked like the perfect family straight out of a magazine. That Friday morning, the house buzzed with excitement. Suitcases were packed, camping gear was loaded into their blue minivan, and the kids ran back and forth making sure they hadn't forgotten their favorite snacks or flashlights. Mark kept checking a paper map of the wilderness, tracing a route with his finger, smiling as he imagined the weekend ahead. Linda brewed coffee in the kitchen, glancing out the window every few seconds, as if she was both thrilled and slightly uneasy about venturing deep into the forest. Still, she brushed it off as normal nerves before a big trip. The plan was simple: 2 days of hiking, 1 night of camping, and plenty of time to bond away from phones, television, and city noise. Emily talked nonstop about photographing wildlife with her disposable camera, while Jake begged his father to teach him how to start a campfire like a real outdoorsman. Mark laughed, ruffled his son's hair, and promised this would be a weekend they'd never forget. In the driveway, their neighbors wished them luck, joking about bears and mountain legends, unaware that their playful words would later feel haunting. As they drove toward the Black Pine Wilderness, the scenery grew darker and more isolated. Tall evergreen trees lined the highway like silent guardians, and the distant mountains looked both beautiful and intimidating. Inside the car, the radio played classic 90s rock. The kids sang along, and Linda leaned her head back against the seat, watching the forest blur past her window. Yet, every so often, she felt a strange chill, the uneasy sensation that the deeper they went, the more the woods seemed to be watching them. By the time they reached the trailhead of Black Pine Path, the sun was already beginning to dip toward the horizon. The parking lot was almost empty except for one dusty truck parked far in the corner. Mark stretched his arms, smiling confidently, while Linda stepped out slowly, scanning the tall trees that swayed gently in the breeze. The air felt heavier here, quieter, thicker, as if the forest itself was holding its breath. Still, the Harpers gathered their backpacks, locked their car, and prepared to step onto the trail, unaware that this moment would mark the last time they were seen as a living family in the outside world. The Black Pine trailhead was quiet in a way that felt unnatural, not peaceful. No birds chirped, no squirrels rustled through the leaves, and even the wind seemed to move carefully between the towering trees. As the Harper family stepped onto the dirt path, the pine needles beneath their boots made a soft crunching sound that echoed deeper into the forest. Mark led the way, confident and relaxed, while Emily followed closely behind, snapping a few pictures with her disposable camera. Linda walked last, one hand resting protectively on Jake's shoulder, her eyes drifting again and again toward the dark gaps between the trees. A park ranger named Thomas Reed happened to be patrolling nearby that afternoon. He noticed the Harpers immediately, a smiling father, 2 energetic kids, and a mother who looked slightly tense despite trying to appear calm. He slowed his truck and waved at them, calling out a friendly, "Have a safe hike." Mark waved back enthusiastically, but Linda only gave a small, forced smile. According to Reed later, something about her expression unsettled him, though he couldn't quite explain why at the time. As the ranger watched them begin their trek, he saw Linda pause suddenly near a bend in the trail. She turned her head slowly, scanning the thick forest behind them, as if she felt eyes on her. Mark stopped and asked if she was okay, and she nodded, brushing it off as just nerves. Still, Reed noticed that she kept glancing over her shoulder long after they resumed walking, her posture stiff, her steps cautious, unlike the rest of her family. The deeper the Harpers moved into Black Pine Path, the darker the surroundings became. Sunlight barely pierced the dense canopy overhead, creating long, twisting shadows that seemed to stretch and shift along the ground. At one point, Reed saw Jake point towards something between the trees, tugging at his father's sleeve, but whatever he was looking at was hidden from view. Mark laughed it off, lifted his son onto his shoulders, and continued forward, disappearing slowly into the green-black maze of the woods. By late afternoon, the ranger completed his patrol and drove past the trailhead again. To his surprise, the Harper family's blue minivan was still parked in the same spot, untouched, silent, and alone. No voices drifted from the forest, no figures emerged from the trail, no sign that the family was heading back. The sky was beginning to dim, painting the trees in a deep amber glow, and for the first time that day, Thomas Reed felt a knot of unease tighten in his stomach. At dawn the next morning, Black Pine Forest looked completely different from the peaceful wilderness it had appeared to be the day before. A thin layer of mist hovered just above the ground, weaving between the tall trees like drifting smoke. The silence felt heavier now, almost oppressive, broken only by the distant hum of helicopters beginning their search. Police cars lined the trailhead parking lot, their flashing lights reflecting faintly off the damp leaves. Volunteers, park officials, and rescue teams gathered in tense groups, exchanging worried glances as they prepared to enter the same forest the Harpers had walked into less than 24 hours earlier. Search and rescue teams moved in carefully, spreading out in multiple directions from Black Pine Path. Trained bloodhounds sniffed the ground, pulling at their leashes, while officers marked potential clues with bright orange flags. Above them, a helicopter circled slowly, its blades chopping through the cold morning air as thermal cameras scanned for any sign of human movement. Yet despite all this effort, the woods felt strangely still, as if they were refusing to give up even the smallest hint of what had happened. As hours passed, the frustration among the searchers grew. There were no footprints that clearly belonged to the family, no broken branches suggesting a struggle, no torn clothing caught on tree bark, and no signs of a campsite along the trail. One officer later admitted it felt like the Harpers had simply stepped off the path and vanished into another world. Even the dogs seemed confused, circling in the same spots again and again without picking up a strong scent. By midday, more volunteers arrived, friends, neighbors, and even strangers who had heard the news. They formed long human chains, walking slowly through dense brush and calling out the family's names. Mark, Linda, Emily, Jake. Their voices echoed across the forest, but only the hollow silence answered back. Some volunteers claimed they felt an icy chill run down their spines, as if the air itself was resisting their presence. As night began to fall, searchlights were turned on, cutting through the darkness in sharp beams. Tents were set up near the trailhead, and a command center was established with maps, radios, and constant communication with the helicopter above. Yet even with all this manpower and technology, the Harper family remained completely missing, not a single clear trace left behind, leaving everyone with a growing sense that something deeply wrong had occurred inside those woods. In the months after the Harper family disappeared, Black Pine Forest slowly developed a dark reputation. What had once been a popular hiking spot became a place people spoke about in hushed voices. Locals started saying the woods had changed since 1997, as if something unseen had taken residence deep inside its shadows. Some hikers reported feeling an overwhelming sense of dread the moment they stepped onto Black Pine Path, like the trees themselves were silently warning them to turn back. Parents began telling their children to stay far away from the trail, especially after sunset. Strange stories began to circulate in nearby towns. One group of college students claimed they heard children laughing in the middle of the night while camping near the forest's edge. They said the laughter sounded playful at first, but slowly turned hollow and unsettling. When they searched with flashlights, they saw nothing, only tall, swaying trees and an unnatural stillness that made their skin crawl. By morning, all 4 students packed up and left without finishing their trip. Another hiker swore he saw a woman in a white jacket standing motionless between 2 towering pines. He described her as thin, pale, and completely silent, her back turned toward him. When he called out, she didn't move. But when he stepped closer, she simply vanished behind the trees as if she had never been there at all. Terrified, he ran back to his car and never returned to Black Pine again. Then came the most disturbing account of all. A solo camper who pitched his tent near the trailhead woke up at exactly 3:17 a.m. to the sound of heavy breathing outside his tent. He felt his entire shelter shake violently, as if someone, or something, was pushing against it. Frozen in fear, he waited in silence until the movement stopped. When he finally dared to unzip his tent, there was nothing there except fresh footprints that led straight into the dark forest. Over time, these chilling encounters transformed Black Pine into something more than just a wilderness area. It became a legend. People started calling it the Cursed Trail. Some believed lost souls wandered there. Others claimed the forest itself was alive, trapping anyone who ventured too far inside. Still, despite all the warnings, a few brave, or foolish, adventurers continued to step onto the path, drawn in by curiosity, mystery, and the haunting question of what really happened to the Harper family. By 2024, the The Harper case had become one of Oregon's most haunting cold cases, mentioned in documentaries, podcasts, and late-night radio shows. New investigators from a specialized wilderness search unit decided to reopen the case, convinced that modern technology might reveal what had been impossible in 1997. They arrived at Black Pine Forest with thermal drones, ground-penetrating radar, high-resolution mapping software, and a team trained specifically to locate hidden or buried sites. As they stepped onto the old trail, many of them admitted feeling a strange heaviness in the air, as if the forest remembered what had happened decades earlier. The team moved slowly, scanning every inch of the ground far beyond the original search radius. Deep in the woods, miles from the trailhead, their equipment suddenly picked up an unusual underground disturbance. The readings suggested disturbed soil, irregular patterns, and something buried beneath layers of fallen leaves and pine needles. The area was so overgrown that sunlight barely touched the ground, and thick moss covered nearly everything in sight. The lead investigator ordered the team to begin clearing the area carefully, piece by piece. As the brush was removed, something unnatural began to emerge from beneath decades of decay. What they uncovered looked like a small, makeshift campsite, a flattened patch of earth where a tent might have once stood. Old rope fragments were tangled around broken branches, and charred wood hinted that a fire had burned there long ago. Yet the campsite was far off any known trail, raising an unsettling question. How did the Harper family get this deep into the wilderness without leaving a trace? Then, partially buried beneath leaves and dirt, one searcher spotted something that made his breath catch in his throat, a small, faded blue backpack. The moment it was lifted, everyone went silent. Inside, they found a few rusted zippers, a crumpled granola bar wrapper, and a child's handwritten name tag, Jake Harper. For the first time in 27 years, there was undeniable physical evidence that the family had been there. As forensic teams examined the backpack more closely, they discovered a tiny, weather-worn notebook tucked into a side pocket. Its pages were yellowed and fragile, stained with mud and water. When carefully opened, the last written line sent a chill through everyone standing nearby. "Mom says we're not alone out here." The words hung in the air like a warning, deepening the mystery of what had truly happened in Black Pine Forest. After the backpack and diary were secured as evidence, investigators widened their search around the abandoned campsite. The forest floor was thick with decades of leaves, roots, and fallen branches, making every step slow and careful. It was during this painstaking process that one team member noticed something metallic glinting through the mud near an old rotted log. At first it looked like simple trash, but when they brushed away the dirt, they realized it was far more significant. A small handheld camcorder, cracked, rusted, and covered in grime. The discovery instantly shifted the mood from cautious to deeply uneasy. Specialists handled the device as if it were fragile glass, sealing it in a protective case before transporting it to a nearby mobile forensic unit. Hours later, after cleaning and restoring enough of its internal components, they managed to retrieve the original tape. The entire team gathered in silence around a small monitor as the screen flickered to life. Static filled the display for a few seconds, accompanied by a low crackling sound that made everyone's nerves tighten. When the image finally stabilized, the video showed Mark Harper standing at the edge of the campsite, smiling nervously at the camera. Behind him, Linda was arranging supplies while Emily sat nearby, sketching in her notebook. The light was fading, painting the forest in deep orange and purple hues. Everything looked ordinary, almost peaceful, until the camera suddenly jerked to the side, as if something had startled Mark. His breathing became heavier, and the smile vanished from his face. The next moments were chilling. A dark shape appeared briefly between the trees, shifting just out of focus. Linda stopped moving completely, her face pale, her eyes locked on the same spot. In a low, trembling whisper, she leaned toward Mark and said, "Turn it off, it's watching us." Her voice carried pure fear, not panic, but something deeper, as if she knew they were in serious danger. Then, without warning, the screen went black. There were no screams, no struggle, no shouting, just total silence. The tape continued rolling for nearly a minute in complete darkness before finally stopping. As the investigators sat frozen in the command tent, no one spoke. The forest outside seemed quieter than ever, as if it had heard the recording too and was waiting for their reaction. The mood inside the command tent changed instantly after the camcorder was played. Investigators spoke in hushed voices, as if raising their volume might somehow wake something in the forest. Night had begun to settle over Black Pine, and the towering trees now looked more like walls than wilderness. Searchlights cut through the darkness in narrow beams, illuminating floating dust, drifting mist, and twisting shadows that seemed to move even when the wind was still. Every member of the team felt the same unspoken thought pressing on them. Whatever happened to the Harper family was still out there. As they prepared to shut down operations for the night, a small group of investigators ventured back toward the abandoned campsite to secure the area. The air felt colder than it had earlier, almost unnaturally so for late summer. One officer later described it as breathing, like the forest itself was alive and inhaling deeply. Leaves crunched beneath their boots, but beyond that, there was complete silence. No insects, no birds, no distant rustling, just an overwhelming stillness that made every nerve feel exposed. Near the edge of the clearing, the lead investigator suddenly stopped in his tracks. He later said he felt someone standing directly behind him before he even heard a sound. Slowly, he turned, and in the dim glow of his flashlight, he saw a faint figure between two towering pines. It looked like a small boy, barely visible, standing perfectly still, facing the team. The outline was thin, blurred, and almost transparent, yet unmistakably human. What made the moment even more chilling was what the figure appeared to be wearing: a small, familiar blue backpack slung over one shoulder. For a split second, the investigator froze, torn between disbelief and instinct. He called out a name under his breath, but the figure didn't move, didn't speak, didn't react. It simply stood there, watching them through the darkness of the trees. Before anyone else could approach, the air shifted again. A cold breeze swept through the clearing, rustling the leaves in a sudden wave. When the team looked back toward the spot, the figure was gone. No footprints. No movement. No trace that anyone had ever been there at all, leaving the investigators staring into the empty forest, hearts pounding, surrounded by shadows that felt far less empty than they appeared. No one ever recovered the bodies of the Harper family, and no physical evidence beyond the backpack and camcorder could explain what happened to them. The official case remains open, listed as one of the most disturbing wilderness disappearances in American history. Some investigators believe they became lost and fell victim to the harsh forest. Others, however, are convinced something far darker claimed them. Today, Black Pine Path is still there, quiet, beautiful, and deeply unsettling. Hikers continue to walk its winding trails, but many do so with fear in their hearts. Locals say that on certain nights, if you stand still long enough, you can hear faint laughter drifting through the trees and the soft crunch of footsteps following just behind you. And if you ever find yourself alone in those woods, miles from civilization, remember this. The Harpers may be gone, but the forest still remembers them. Evergreen ghost. And perhaps it's still watching.
If you liked this video, don't forget to hit that like button, share it with your friends, and drop your thoughts in the comments below. Most importantly, subscribe and hit the bell icon so the next secret finds you first.